The phone logs arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, stacked in a plain manila folder that the accountant had left on the edge of my desk at the lodge office without even knocking. 3 weeks of call records, every number, every duration, every timestamp printed in cold black ink, and right there in the middle of the first page sat my mother's cell phone number dialing the private banking line 17 times in a single 48-hour stretch. My name is Elise Crow, I am 35 years old. I manage the day-to-day operations of a luxury mountain retreat outside Truckee, California, the kind of place that books out 2 years ahead for winter holidays and charges more for a single night than most people spend on a used car. I built the guest experience systems, the revenue forecasts, the staff protocols. I kept the numbers clean. That is what I do. I keep things clean until someone else decides they are not. If you have ever watched a family business start to tilt while everyone still smiles for the photos, tell me where you are watching from. I want to know how common this particular kind of quiet collapse actually is. I did not cry when I saw the logs. I did not throw the folder. I sat very still in the leather chair that faces the window overlooking the Pine Ridge and I read every line twice. My mother's number. My aunt's number. My brother's private line that was supposed to be for emergency use only. Calls clustered in the early morning and late at night, all of them lasting just long enough to move money if you already knew the passwords and the account numbers. The retreat itself was still running. Guests were checking in for the fall foliage packages. Staff were polishing the lobby floors. My business partner Barrett Sloan was downstairs smiling at a corporate group from Sacramento and telling them the place ran like a Swiss watch. He did not know yet that the watch had already been opened and the springs removed. I called the accountant, Nash Pruitt, from the office landline so the conversation would sit on the company record. He answered on the second ring and kept his voice flat the way he always does when the numbers have gone sideways. You asked for the phone records tied to the private banking access, he said. Those are them. I printed everything the carrier would release under the company authorization. There is more coming from the secondary accounts. How much more? Enough that you should not discuss it on this line. I hung up. The office suddenly felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that happens right before people start choosing sides out loud. 2 days earlier my brother had texted me a single sentence, the slush account is gone. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I had assumed he meant a temporary transfer glitch. My brother has always kept a private reserve for capital improvements and off-season payroll gaps. He called it the contingency fund. I called it the only honest money left in the family structure. Apparently honesty had an expiration date I missed. I drove the short distance from the lodge office to the smaller staff cabin I use when the main house is full of relatives. The road was empty. The air smelled like cold pine and coming snow. Inside the cabin I spread the phone logs across the kitchen table and began matching timestamps against the banking alerts I had already pulled. Every cluster of calls lined up with a silent movement of funds out of the contingency account and into a holding entity I had never seen before. The entity was registered under my aunt's middle name and a post office box in Reno. My aunt has always been the one who smiles widest in family photographs and never forgets a birthday card. She is also the one who taught my mother how to keep 2 sets of books when the lodge was still a modest inn. I learned that fact the hard way years ago and filed it under things that do not matter until they suddenly do. That night I slept in fragments. At 3 a.m. I got up and walked the perimeter of the property in the dark, the same route the night security staff walk, because movement felt safer than sitting still with the numbers. By the time the sky started to lighten I had already decided the next step would not be a family conversation. Family conversations in this bloodline are theater. I needed paper that could not be rewritten. Wednesday morning Barrett Sloan found me in the operations office before the first staff meeting. He closed the door harder than necessary. Your mother called me last night, he said. She said you are planning to freeze the operating accounts. She said you have always been dramatic when money is involved. I looked at him for a long second. Barrett has been my partner for 6 years. We split the original investment cleanly. He handles guest relations and marketing. I handle the actual numbers. Until this week I would have trusted him with the master keys. I am not freezing anything yet, I told him. I am documenting. There is a difference. She made it sound like you are trying to cut your brother out. My brother is the one who texted me that the money is gone. Barrett's mouth tightened. He has a particular way of looking at the floor when he is already halfway to the other side of an argument. I need this place stable for the winter season. Whatever is happening between the four of you needs to stay off the property. It is already on the property, I said. The transfers came through the same banking portal we all use. He left without answering. I watched him walk down the hall toward the main lobby and I knew the first side had already been chosen. I spent the rest of the morning pulling every authorization form I still had access to. The lawyer, Phoebe Lang, called me at 11. I had sent her the phone logs and the preliminary transfer list the night before. Her voice stayed level, but the pauses were longer than usual. These call patterns are not casual, she said. 17 contacts in 48 hours to the same private banker is not a family checking in. It is coordination. I am going to need the full secondary statements and any device that still holds the original texts from your brother. I have the texts, I said. I also have the original contingency account statements from the last 18 months. The balance never dropped below 6 figures until 3 weeks ago. Bring everything. And Elise, do not confront anyone on the property. Not yet. The second you raise your voice in front of staff, the narrative becomes that. You are unstable. I almost laughed. Unstable was already the word they were loading. By Thursday, the atmosphere inside the lodge had shifted in small, ugly ways. 2 long-term housekeepers stopped making eye contact. The front desk lead started routing all banking questions to Barrett instead of me. My father left a voicemail that simply said he hoped I was not making this harder than it needed to be. He did not ask what this was. He already knew. I met the resort manager, Celia Vale, in the back service corridor after lunch. Celia has worked the property longer than I have. She keeps the mechanical systems alive and the staff schedule honest. She handed me a folded printout without speaking. It was a copy of an internal memo my mother had circulated to the senior team the previous evening. The memo stated that operational oversight was being temporarily realigned for the high season and that all financial inquiries should go through Barrett or my aunt until further notice. I thought you should see it before the meeting, Celia said. They did not put your name on the distribution. I thanked her and put the memo in the same folder as the phone logs. The folder was getting thicker. Friday morning my brother finally called. His voice sounded thin, the way it does when he has not slept. They moved it, he said. All of it. The contingency, the capital reserve, the seasonal buffer. Mom and Aunt Annette signed the authorizations using the emergency protocols we set up after the last fire season. I did not see the requests until the money was already gone. Where is it now? Holding company. Reno. Aunt Annette's name on the paperwork. They told me it was temporary, for tax positioning. Then they told me I was overreacting. You texted me it was gone. That was not an overreaction. He was quiet for several seconds. Barrett already knows. Mom called him. She said if I side with you the partnership dissolves and the winter bookings get pulled. He believed her. I looked out the office window at the ridge. Clouds were stacking the way they do before the first real snow. I am not asking you to side with me, I said. I am asking you to stop pretending the numbers will fix themselves. He hung up without promising anything. That afternoon the secondary account statements arrived from Nash. I opened the file on the secure laptop I keep offline for exactly this kind of work. The statements showed a series of silent transfers totaling just under $2 million, all of them authorized from devices registered to my mother and my aunt, all of them timestamped within minutes of the phone calls on the carrier logs. The money had not simply moved. It had been redirected into an entity that listed my brother as a silent beneficiary and me as nothing at all. I sat with that fact for a long time. The cold part of my mind, the part that has always handled the spreadsheets, noted the precision of the structure. The rest of me felt the floor tilt. I printed one clean set of the new statements and the matching phone logs. I placed them in a sealed envelope addressed to Phoebe Lang and had Celia drive it into town so it would not sit on the property overnight. Then I walked the service road behind the staff cabins until the light failed. When I came back, the main house lights were on. My mother's car was in the circular drive. My aunt's car sat beside it. Barrett's truck was parked under the porte-cochere like he already lived here. I did not go inside. I went back to the cabin, locked the door, and opened the laptop again. The last file Nash had sent was a simple note: more records are being released Monday. The bank compliance officer is asking questions now. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Somewhere in the main house, people who share my blood and my last name were deciding how to erase the part of the story that included me. The phone logs and the statements were already on their way to the only person in this entire mountain range I still trusted to read them without blinking. Outside, the wind picked up and the first thin snow began to fall across the ridge. I turned off every light in the cabin and sat in the dark with the folder on my lap, waiting for Monday the way you wait for a door that is about to open in the wrong direction. The snow kept falling through the night. And by Monday morning the ridge road was glazed enough that the first delivery truck slid sideways into the ditch near the lower gate. I was already awake. I had not really slept. The folder still sat on the table exactly where I left it, and the sealed envelope I had sent with Celia was already on Phoebe's desk in town according to the text she sent at 6:14. I drove into Truckee before the lodge kitchen even opened. The bank branch on Donner Pass Road was still dark when I parked across the street, but the compliance officer, Mira Soto, met me at the side entrance with a cardboard box that looked heavier than it should have. Mira is not family. She is the one person inside the regional banking system who has watched our accounts long enough to know which signatures used to mean something. She set the box on the conference table in the small back room and did not offer coffee. "These are the secondary statements you requested under the corporate authorization," she said. "And the device access logs for the private portal. Your mother's credentials and your aunt's credentials were used for every transfer. Your brother's login appears only after the money had already moved, when he tried to reverse two of the smaller wires and was locked out." I opened the top folder. The statements were cleaner than the ones Nash had sent. They showed the exact sequence: contingency fund drained in 5 precise movements, each one timed to the phone calls on the carrier printouts, each one routed through the Reno holding company that listed my aunt as managing member and my brother as residual beneficiary. My name appeared nowhere. Not as signer. Not as notice party. Not even as a historical contact. Mira watched me turn the pages. "There is one more layer," she said. "The holding company opened a new operating account last Thursday. Funds are already being transferred out again into what looks like personal trust instruments. I cannot freeze anything without a court order or a formal dispute filing from a controlling interest. Right now the controlling interest is them." I thanked her, signed the receipt, and carried the box to the car. The snow had stopped, but the air still tasted metallic. On the drive back up the mountain I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the edge of the box because it felt like the only solid thing left. Celia met me at the staff entrance with the same tight expression she had worn on Friday. "Barrett called an emergency operations meeting for 10, she said. "Your mother and your aunt are already in the main conference room. They brought the partnership amendment papers." I went straight there. The conference room smells like lemon oil and old money. My mother sat at the head of the table in the chair that used to be mine during high season. My aunt sat to her right with a leather portfolio open in front of her. Barrett stood near the window looking at the snow instead of at me. My father occupied the far end, silent, hands folded the way he does when he has already decided not to speak. My mother did not waste time. "We need to stabilize the property before the winter contracts start canceling," she said. Her voice was even, almost kind. "The contingency fund has been repositioned for tax efficiency and liability protection. You were not consulted because you have a history of overreacting to temporary measures." Barrett agrees the partnership needs clearer lines of authority through the high season. I set the box of bank statements on the table hard enough that the sound stopped her. "These are not temporary," I said. "These are the phone logs matching every call you and my aunt made to the private banker. These are the device records showing your credentials authorizing the transfers. These are the statements proving the money left the contingency account and is already moving into personal trusts. My brother's name is on the residual, mine is erased." My aunt closed the portfolio slowly. "You always did prefer paper to people, Elise. That is why this was necessary. You would have frozen everything and scared the guests." Barrett finally turned. "I need the place operational. If the two of you are going to burn the partnership over family accounting, I will exercise the buy-sell clause." I already had the draft prepared. The room tilted. I felt the same internal slide I had felt reading the first phone logs, only steeper. My brother was not in the room. No one had mentioned him. I looked at my mother. "You used the emergency protocols we wrote after the fire season. You used my brother's private reserve. You told the staff I was the unstable one. And you brought my business partner into the room before you brought me." My mother did not raise her voice. She never does when the knife is already in. "You were never going to let the money move the way it needed to move. Your brother understands that. Barrett understands that. The only person who does not is you." I picked up the box again. "Phoebe Lang has the same records. Mira Soto at the bank has the same records. The compliance file is open. Whatever amendment you are about to slide across this table will be attached to a formal dispute the moment it is signed." My aunt stood. The smile she uses for guests was gone. "You will destroy the winter season and the family name with it. Is that the plan? Because if it is, we will make certain every booking agent and every investor knows exactly who forced the collapse." Barrett spoke without looking at me. "I am signing the temporary reassignment of operational control this afternoon. You can fight it in court or you can step back until the season is over. Those are the options." I left the folder of phone logs and the top set of statements on the table so they would have to look at them while they signed. Then I walked out. Celia was waiting in the service corridor. She did not ask questions. She simply handed me the keys to the older service truck that is rarely used and said the cabin would stay locked until I said otherwise. I drove down the mountain to the small office Phoebe keeps above the bookstore on Commercial Row. She was already on a call with Mira Soto when I arrived. The two of them had compared the device logs against the transfer timestamps and found one additional detail the earlier statements had buried. 3 of the outbound wires from the Reno Holding Company had been coded as family distribution, residual beneficiary adjustment. The residual beneficiary listed on those particular wires was not my brother. It was a trust instrument, created 6 days earlier in my aunt's name alone. Phoebe laid the printouts side by side. "They told your brother he was still protected. They told Barrett the money was only being parked. The actual paperwork shows a quiet redirection of the entire reserve into instruments that exclude both of you. Your brother's residual interest was decorative. Yours was never real." I sat in the client chair and stared at the pages until the numbers stopped looking like numbers. The cold part of my mind catalogued the sequence. The rest of me felt the last clean edge of the family structure shear off. My brother called while I was still in Phoebe's office. His voice was raw. "They just sent me the trust summary. My name is on a schedule that pays me a fixed annual amount and nothing else. The principal is gone. They used the emergency protocols and then locked the door behind me. I know, I said. I have the statements. Barrett is signing the operational papers at 4. Mom already told the senior staff that you are on leave for personal reasons. Celia refused to post the notice. They are writing her up. I looked out Phoebe's window at the snow starting again over the railroad tracks. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. Not even an acknowledgement. He was quiet for a long time. I already did. This morning. They said it was the only way to keep the residual payments from being frozen. I believed them. The line went dead. Phoebe reached across the desk and turned the last page of the trust summary so I could see the signature block. My brother's name was there in the same blue ink he has used since we were teenagers. Below it, in the same block, my mother's signature and my aunt's signature sat side by side like they had planned the spacing in advance. I stood up. The office felt too small. The mountain outside felt too large. I told Phoebe to file the formal dispute and the temporary restraining request on the remaining operating accounts before the close of business. She nodded once and began typing. Outside, the service truck was already dusted with new snow. I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and watched the flakes collect on the windshield until the glass turned opaque. Somewhere up the mountain my mother and my aunt were finishing the paperwork that would remove my access codes, my name on the vendor list, and the last piece of the contingency fund that had ever been honest. Barrett would sign. My brother had already signed. The phone logs and the hidden statements were the only things left that still told the truth in chronological order. I started the truck and drove back toward the ridge, not because I had a plan, but because the alternative was sitting still while the last of the structure finished collapsing without me. The road was slick. The box of bank records rode on the passenger seat like a passenger that refused to speak. By the time I reached the lower gate, the sky had gone the flat gray that means the real storm is still deciding how hard it wants to hit. Celia's text arrived as I parked behind the staff cabins. They posted the notice. Your access codes are disabled as of 5 o'clock. Barrett signed. Your aunt is in the main office changing the passwords on the reservation system. I sat in the truck with the engine running and the heater on low and watched the light change over the pines. The folder of phone logs was still in my bag. The statements were still in the box. The signatures were already dry. Whatever came next would not be a conversation. It would be the sound of a door that had finished closing. The heater in the service truck kept running while the new snow covered the hood. Celia's text sat on the screen like a final stamp. Access codes disabled. Passwords already changing. Barrett had signed. My aunt was inside the main office rewriting the digital locks on everything I had built. I turned the truck around and drove back down the mountain in the dark. The road was worse than it had been that morning. Twice the rear tires slid and corrected themselves with a soft metallic protest. I did not slow down. By the time I reached Phoebe's office, the bookstore below was closed and the only light left was the one in her second-floor window. She opened the door before I knocked. The temporary restraining request is filed, she said. Mira Soto flagged the remaining operating accounts at the bank level an hour ago. Nothing else moves without a court stamp. The trust instruments your aunt created are now under formal notice. That does not bring the money back tonight, but it stops the next quiet transfer. I set the box of statements on her desk for the second time that day. They already disabled my codes. Barrett signed the operational papers. My brother signed the residual schedule this morning. Phoebe nodded once. I know. Celia forwarded the internal notice. We attach all of it to the filing. The phone logs, the device access records, the statements that show the residual was decorative, the signatures. Authority is in the file now. The rest is sequence and pressure. I slept on the narrow couch in her office that night because the cabin no longer felt like ground I could stand on. At some point after midnight, the wind shifted and the power flickered. I woke to the sound of the building settling and the knowledge that the family structure I had spent 15 years treating as solid had finished its quiet collapse without needing my permission. Tuesday arrived gray and wind-scoured. Mira Soto called before 8. The compliance hold had triggered an automatic review of every related entity. The Reno Holding Company, the new personal trusts, the residual schedule my brother had signed under pressure, all of it now sat inside a formal inquiry. My aunt's managing member authority was temporarily suspended pending documentation. The money itself had not returned to the contingency account. It had simply stopped moving. That is the best outcome available without a full hearing, Mira said. The funds are locked in place. No one touches them until the dispute is resolved or withdrawn. I thanked her and hung up. The cold part of my mind noted the irony with clinical precision. My mother and my aunt had redirected the entire reserve in silence. Authority had redirected it again, just as silently, into a holding pattern neither side controlled. The fortune they had moved so carefully now belonged to no one for the moment. Barrett sent a single email at 9:17. The subject line read operational continuity. The body stated that my leave was indefinite and that any attempt to re-enter the property would be treated as interference with high season operations. He copied my mother and my aunt. He did not copy my brother. I did not reply. Instead, I drove to the small storage unit I keep on the industrial side of Truckee, the one that has never been on any family inventory list. Inside were the offline backups of every revenue system, every guest preference database, every vendor contract I had written over 6 years. I loaded the hard drives into a duffel bag and drove them to Phoebe's office. She locked them in the fire safe without comment. Celia met me at the coffee place on the edge of town at noon. She looked older than she had 3 days earlier. They wrote me up for refusing to post the notice, she said. I told them to put it in the file. I am done after the current contract's clear. There is a small operations role opening at a place over in Squaw Valley. I already applied. I nodded. The chosen pieces were already separating from the ones that had chosen against me. My brother called one last time that afternoon. His voice had the flat quality of someone who has finished arguing with himself. The residual payments are frozen too, he said. Mom told me it was temporary. Aunt Annette told me it was protection. The bank told me it is an open compliance matter. I signed the paper that made me a beneficiary of nothing. I know, I said. I am leaving the mountain for a while. There is a construction job in Reno that does not require any of our last names. I do not expect you to wait for me to figure out how to look at this. I am not waiting, I answered. I am finished. He was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, the phone logs were the only thing that still told the truth in order. Everything else was theater. He hung up. Wednesday, the formal response from my mother's attorney arrived. It accused me of destabilizing the partnership, of manufacturing urgency, of using private banking records for personal leverage. It demanded I withdraw the dispute and the restraining request within 72 hours or face a countersuit for interference. The language was polished and almost gentle. It was also the last communication I intended to answer. Phoebe filed the opposition the same afternoon. She attached the complete set of phone logs, the device access records, the secondary statements, the trust instruments that excluded me and reduced my brother to a decorative residual, and the internal notice that had erased my access while the money was still moving. Mira Soto's compliance file number sat at the top of the packet. Authority had the sequence. The rest was waiting. I spent Thursday packing the few things that still belonged solely to me. Clothes. The offline drives. The original contingency account ledgers from the years before the emergency protocols existed. I left the cabin keys on the kitchen table and drove the service truck back to the lower lot so Celia would not have to explain its absence. On Friday morning I met Kellen Briggs at the diner near the railroad tracks. Kellen has known the property longer than any of us. He used to run independent capital improvements for mountain lodges up and down the range and walked away from our family contracts years ago when the bookkeeping first started to smell. He listened to the entire timeline without interrupting. When I finished, he slid a single-page letter of intent across the table. There is a mid-size retreat on the Nevada side that needs an operations rebuild before next winter, he said. They want someone who already knows how the numbers are supposed to look when no one is performing. The role is clean. No family names on the paperwork. If you want it, the start date is open. I read the page twice. The salary was lower than what the partnership had once paid. The authority was clearer. I signed it with the same pen I had used to annotate the phone logs. That afternoon the bank issued a formal freeze notice on every related entity. The contingency funds, the Reno Holding Company, the personal trusts, the residual schedule, all of it locked pending resolution or court order. My mother called once. I let it go to voicemail. My aunt called twice. I deleted both without listening. Barrett sent a final email stating that the partnership buy-sell process would begin at the end of the season. I archived it. The last thing I did before leaving Truckee was stand on the overlook above the property at dusk. The main lodge lights were on. Cars I recognized sat in the circular drive. Somewhere inside, people who share my blood were still explaining to each other that the measures had been temporary, necessary, protective. The phone logs and the statements sat in a lawyer's file safe and a bank compliance file, chronological and indifferent. The money they had moved so carefully now sat in a quiet institutional pause that belonged to none of them. I drove west until the ridge disappeared behind me. The new role in Nevada would not restore the years or the trust or the version of family that had existed before the first silent transfer. It would not make my brother unsign the residual paper. It would not make Barrett unsay the words about interference. It would simply be work that did not require me to keep two sets of books in my head. The irreversible pieces stayed irreversible. The access codes stayed disabled. The signatures stayed dry. The remaining ties finished breaking in the ordinary way that things break when no one is watching the exact moment of the fracture. What I kept was the sequence on paper, the decision to stop performing, and the knowledge that chosen people, Celia, Mira, Phoebe, Kellen, had read the same records and still opened the next door. I do not know how far is too far until someone finally measures the distance with phone logs and bank statements and a set of signatures that cannot be walked back. I measured it. Then I left the mountain. Thank you for listening to the whole of it. If you have ever watched a family redirect the ground under your feet while still smiling for the photographs, tell me in the comments how far you would have let it go before you stopped answering the calls.